The idea that humans might share a common ancestry with the great apes, and indeed every other living organism on the planet, was anathema to scientists like McCoy. Most famously, this idea was anathema to Richard Owen, who had been involved in the selection of another foundation professor at the University of Melbourne, that of medicine. George Britton Halford was appointed there. Halford would turn out to be every bit as anti-Darwinian as McCoy and Owen, and from early in the 1860s used comparative anatomy to demonstrate the falsity of the link between men and apes. Owen was perhaps the greatest comparative anatomist of his day, at least in Britain. He was an interesting and controversial figure. During the 1830s and 1840s, he had created a theory of morphological change that relied upon Cuvier's embranchement, but with the kicker that each embranchement emerged out of an archetypal organism. The archetype appeared to be imbued with a similar urge to transformation as Lamarck's willing to complexity, although in the archetype's case, the resulting species were less complex. Originally, Owen's transcendental anatomy, that is, anatomy that transcended individual species, searching for a unity of plan, was imbued with the type of pantheism found in German Naturphilosophy. The theory could be made to work with transformism. We only have to look at Cuvier's great rival, Geoffroy Saint-Hilaire, to see where transcendental anatomy could lead. And certainly there were elements of Owen's thinking that could be read as going in that direction. Owen came from a poor background and was able to claw his way up the ladder of preferment, eventually to become the Professor of Comparative Anatomy at the Royal College of Surgeons. And because he did not possess the independent wealth of a Darwin, he was entirely reliant upon wealthy patrons to promote his interest. At that time, the Royal College of Surgeons was dominated by Palaites who took umbrage to the innate pantheism of his archetypal theory. He was panned by the Sedgwicks of the world, perhaps giving Darwin an object lesson in what he might expect if he didn't get his argument right. After this, Owen seemed to retreat to a conservative, anti-transformist view of nature, which chimed much better with the men who paid his wages. Of course, he'd go on to become a harsh critic of Darwin's theory of evolution through natural selection, and therefore the bestiality of human origins. It seems such a threatening idea. Indeed, strip away the veneer of culture and civilization, and all that you're left with is another kind of animal, one that, to be sure, was more intelligent than the other animals, but an animal nonetheless. Human nature, in the Darwinian scheme of things, was also animal nature. A dog and a human both smiled, and the reason they shared this expression of emotion was because humans and wolves shared a common ancestry. Undoubtedly, it was a radical position that undermined the strict separation between humans and animals that was central to the science of Christianity. We know that Darwin intentionally sidestepped this issue in Origin. Light will be thrown on the origin of man and his history. We've seen the recreations of the great debate between Huxley and Wilberforce that was kicked off by one of the first uses of the ape insult. But now we need to take a look at anti-Darwinian views of the ape-human nexus, or rather disjunct, depending upon which side of the debate you stood. It was all very timely. The age of European empires was rapidly catching up with Africa, scrambling for it, colonising and controlling it. Part of this was driven by exploration. The year is 1855. Darwin had, in the previous months, enthusiastically picked up his species work and was working towards writing the multi-volume Natural Selection, which was never published due to Wallace's intervention. Across the Atlantic, the French-American explorer Paul du Chaillu was commissioned by the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia to go on an expedition to darkest Africa. There he travelled extensively, exploring new worlds, seeking out new life and new civilizations, boldly going He also shot a lot of wildlife that he found for collectors and collections around the world. And what a discovery he made! The fabled beast, the gorilla, a huge ape with human-like characteristics, had been rumoured in classical writings, but never seen by Europeans. Du Chaillu not only confirmed their existence, but shot quite a few of them. He used them in the lectures he toured around Europe. He sent them back to collections in the USA and the UK. He created the gorilla sensation. Du Chaillu toured Britain in 1861 with his specimens, giving lectures but also selling specimens to collectors and museums. Du Chaillu favoured Owen with not a few dead apes at a price. What a godsend! Owen had gorilla brains at the tip of his dissecting scalpel and Darwin in his sights. If he could demonstrate that the gorilla brain was significantly different in structure to that of a human, he could drive a wedge between the great apes and Homo sapiens, thus maintaining the special place of humans in nature. In fact, Owen availed himself of Du Chaillu's good offices by appearing after the explorer's talk at the Royal Institution. Du Chaillu was a very theatrical performer. He brought to life the supposed savagery of the gorillas by showing the beasts charging, pounding their chests and dying in a rain of his bullets. Owen then came on stage and said that the gorilla's brains lacked a human-like cerebrum and hippocampus, so were nothing like humans. Transformism was wrong. At this time, Huxley and Lyell were both working on ape-related material. Lyell had told Darwin that he intended to go the whole orang with his geological evidences of the antiquity of man. He didn't, much to Darwin's chagrin. "I'm fearfully disappointed at Lyell's excessive caution," he said. "The book is a mere digest." Huxley, however, was never one to shy away from the fight. He seethed about Owen's performance. Indeed, he sent a rebuttal to the Athenaeum magazine, where the Du Chaillu own shenanigans had been approvingly reported. It was on. Owen's rebuttal was described by Adrian Desmond as haughty. Huxley responded again with vigour. "Life is too short," he said, "to go on slaying the slain." A quip that ended up immortalised by Punch in satirical verse. And here I'll read the whole thing out because it's really great. Sort of Gilbert and Sullivan, like I guess you'd probably describe it as. Here we go. 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 Then Huxley and Owen, with rivalry glowing, with pen and ink rushed to the scratch. 'Tis brain versus brain, till one of them's slain. "By Jove, it will be a good match." Says Owen, "You can see the brain of a chimpanzee is always exceedingly small, with the hindermost horn of extremity shorn, and no hippocampus at all." The professor then tells them that man's cerebellum, from a vertical point you can't see, that each convolution contains a solution of archencephalic degree, that apes have no nose, and thumbs for great toes, and a pelvis both narrow and slight. They can't stand upright, unless to show fight with Du Chaillu, that chivalrous knight. Next Huxley replies that Owen he lies, and garbles his Latin quotation, that his facts are not new, his mistakes not a few, detrimental to his reputation. To twice slay the slain by dint of the brain, thus Huxley concludes his review, is but labour in vain, unproductive of gain, and so I shall bid you adieu. Du Chaillu's apes had caused a sensation and a scientific controversy. The coming together of the Huxley-Owen fight was not merely fortuitous. No happenstance here. The one fed off the other, and the other fed off the one. What was really being debated was human and animal nature. The reports of the gorilla's ferocity, echoes of which we see in King Kong, were used to distance humans from animals. But unlike Lyell, Huxley wouldn't allow it. His evidences of man's place in nature was explicitly designed to put to bed, for once and for all, the idea that humans were not animals and that we did share an evolutionary inheritance with all life. As an aside, Huxley remained sceptical about natural selection, but he was absolutely convinced about common ancestry. How evolution actually happened was an agnostic matter for him, although he may have held to some form of saltation. But that evolution occurred and that common ancestry was a fact that derived from the natural force of transmutation was an article of faith.